What is the best video game opening ever made? Kind of a hard question to answer, huh? I mean, there are probably a ton of games that come to mind, and I'm sure everyone probably has a different answer. Take a couple of seconds here and think of maybe like 2 or 3 you think are really strong examples, okay? I'll wait. You got a few? Okay. What about these openings makes them good? Maybe you're drawn in with an immediate set piece. Maybe there's an emotional opening so unforgettable that you're then hooked in the story. My point is that the answer obviously changes from game to game, and that playing enough of the good ones makes you realize when a game misses the mark and begins the game on the wrong foot. Sometimes it's awkward or rushed and truncated narrative setups. Other times it's the claims of poor pacing, where a game takes too long to get itself started. And other times it's the over-tutorialization that you get with just about every JRPG that you hear gets good after 10 hours or whatever. All this to say, over the holidays, I downloaded and started the mostly critically acclaimed Indiana Jones and the Great Circle on my Series X, and within 5 minutes, found myself saying, hey, this is kinda bad, actually. So, how does recreating one of the best opening scenes in movie history make for such a bad video game opening? I'll tell you how. It's time for another save room. Grab your whip, your journal, and like the only cool fedora to possibly exist, because we're talking Indiana Jones today, baby. This is the opening to Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, a nearly shot-for-shot recreation of the iconic sequence from the movie Raiders of the Lost Ark that ends with Indiana Jones running away from a giant boulder after stealing a golden idol. Most of what's in the movie is in the game, too. There's the walk through the South American jungle, there's Alfred Molina with spiders, and there's the dramatic Harrison Ford reveal as Indiana steps out from the shadows and into the light. The twist is, of course, because it's a game, that you are Indiana Jones, playing through the iconic sequence. On paper, this should work as a standout opening, but it actually ends up leaving a bad first impression. Let me tell you why. First impressions are everything. Whether it's a book, movie, TV show, or game, the opening minutes are vital for hooking audiences in and getting them invested in a story. But different openings serve different purposes, and with it comes different techniques. Take, for example, the opening sequence of Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight. While the 5-minute bank heist may not focus directly on Batman, it does serve as the villain introduction of the film, informing audiences of just how evil Heath Ledger's Joker is and how tense the tone of the movie will be. This technique works so well for a Batman movie that Nolan used it again in The Dark Knight Rises to introduce Bane, while Matt Reeves used it to introduce Riddler in 2022's The Batman. Another technique is the plot catalyst opening, an opening sequence that sets up the events for the rest of the story, like in 2023's Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Here, Gwen Stacy meets an alternate universe Vulture and ends the sequence by saving the day and joining the Spider Society, led by Miguel O'Hara. And it's Miles' personal connection with Gwen that sets up the rest of the movie, well, across the Spider-Verse. But in the case of Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, the decision to emulate the opening sequence of Raiders of the Lost Ark means that Machine Games is attempting to recreate a specific technique that Spielberg used for the original movie, and that's the character introduction. Character introductions are a fairly straightforward concept. It's a sequence of action or dialogue that informs the audience who the character is, maybe what their emotional state is and how they react to their environment. and how they're involved in any larger narrative. In other words, we get to know who our protagonist is first. That way we, the audience, are emotionally invested before any major plot stuff begins. For example, we can look at the silhouette figure of Daniel Craig's James Bond in Skyfall, walking into focus with an icy stare and raising his gun as he breaches a room. While we think of him as a cold, clinical spy, his first action is to attempt to save the life of a fellow MI6 agent. And it's M in the earpiece that makes him leave his comrade behind. Ryan Gosling's detached line deliveries of the nameless driver in Drive, on the other hand, informs us of how seriously he takes his profession as a getaway driver. And Jesse Eisenberg's dialogue as Mark Zuckerberg in The Social Network for 5 straight minutes tells us one undeniable thing that will persist in the framing of the rest of the movie about the future founder of Facebook. Mark's kind of an asshole. Raiders of the Lost Ark, however, is on a whole other level. In terms of character introduction, it is one of the quintessential examples of how to start a movie. So good even, it makes you wonder why it hasn't joined the Criterion Collection yet.
That belongs in a museum. So do you.
And like, duh, Spielberg is and has been one of the best to ever do it. Of course the opening of the movie is gonna be good. But it's the way Indy is introduced that makes the scene so striking. Beyond costume, the shot composition tells us he's fearless in the face of danger, seemingly educated and well-versed in history, and an action badass who can disarm a dude with nothing but a whip. All before we even get a peek at his face. And all before the iconic Golden Idol sequence in the cave that reinforces the same 3 qualities we saw briefly showcased out in the jungle. In less than 10 minutes, we know exactly what kind of guy Indiana is. Or Henry, if you're a real fan, you know his real name. And, of course, what kind of movie we can expect. And it's all thanks to immaculate framing. It's elite stuff. But The Great Circle isn't really doing this. At least, not exactly. Or more specifically, for the same reason. In fact, I'd say The Great Circle is actually banking on the fact that you know who Indiana Jones is and what sequence you're exactly going to play next. In other words, it leans almost entirely into the movie that the whole section becomes one big reference. Sure, some of the same shots are digitally recreated to mimic Spielberg's camera, but the cutscenes are placed in between first-person sections of slowly walking forward in the jungle. There are no side dolly shots of camera following subjects. No point-of-view shots from behind jungle foliage as if someone were watching. And no establishing shot and title card. And with those things absent, you don't really get the same effect. In other words, you need the language of film to make this scene both flow and work as well as it does. And mimicry without the pace of film just falls flat. Worse, it's jarring. Where going back to the game medium after a few short seconds of a scene you can point your finger toward the screen ends up not serving any fundamental purpose apart from recognition. And purpose really is the qualifier here, since this section acts as a nostalgia trip character introduction. Because it's a video game, it also means it has to function as somewhat of a tutorial. But the problem is that it can't really do that as effectively either, since the scene is limited to what the movie already established. Apart from learning how to move, crouch, and sprint, most of the button prompts the game tries to teach you are actually contextual to a specific sequence. Move the brush. Move the spiders, use a stick, and pour sand. It's not really much to go off of. In short, slowly walking through a jungle with only trivial tasks to highlight gameplay just doesn't work in recreating the scene. This is an entirely different medium after all, and it can't translate the pace and effect from the form of the movie as successfully. It ends up as nothing more than a superficial recreation meant only to support YouTube trailers that you can be Indiana Jones. It's not a real character introduction. It's not a framing device. And it's not a good intro. So then, what purpose does it serve? And what would make it better? Uncharted 2 has one of the greatest video game openings of all time. As the screen fades in from black, a wounded Nathan Drake wakes up on a sideways train just as it's collapsing off the edge of a cliff. We're given no context. Drop straight into the game on media res, or in the middle of. But the opening isn't just great because we're dropped straight into the action. It's good because it uses the tension of a major set piece to then give you Uncharted 2's plot catalyst through flashbacks while you try and survive through the wreckage. And what better hook is there than that? Even if you didn't play the first Uncharted and have no idea who Nathan Drake is, the very first question on your mind that you immediately want answered is, well, how the fuck did he end up hanging off the side of a train? Immediately you understand everything about the genre of the game.
That's my blood. That's my blood. It's a lot of my blood.
Over-the-top pulp action with underlying comedic relief. You're locked in. And everything that follows during the plot catalyst flashbacks, meeting Flynn, meeting Chloe, and plotting to steal the museum artifact, drives our lingering curiosity. We know this is all going to end bad, and we have to know why. And even though the beginning of Uncharted 2 doesn't necessarily use a character introduction opening, similar to Raiders, we get all the characterization of Nathan Drake within just a couple of minutes. Historical intellectual, suave and morally ambiguous treasure hunter, and, of course, action Chad. All while at the same time tutorializing platforming and shooting. So, if the Great Circle is using the iconic character introduction from Raiders, flawed tutorials and all, how come it doesn't work in the larger context of the game? In short, the game has two openings. Immediately after the opening section in the jungle of South America, we're then given the actual opening at Marshall College with the actual title card of the Great Circle. And this is where Machine Games does the real legwork of introducing the plot catalyst of the game's story as a giant comes to steal the cat mummy for reasons Indiana needs to uncover. And it's here where we get actual tutorials like learning how to use the game's map, learning how to brawl, and learning how the game wants you to make educated inferences to complete puzzles. It's good stuff. And the nods to John Williams' score, Troy Baker's remarkable performance as Indy,
Doesn't say.
and Spielbergian framing all feel right at home in this section. The problem is that the game wastes 20 minutes making a flat first impression. For a pulp action-adventure story, that's just not what you want. Really, it's the desire to want to emulate so closely that starts the game on the wrong foot. Despite the Great Circle frequently and successfully emulating a lot of Spielberg's film language within the cinematics of the game, like silhouetted figures, lighting, blocking, and sweeping music, the very fact the design of the opening is primarily first person means that the entire notion of character introduction is subverted in favor of supposed gamer immersion. And that's just not what the story of the game demands at that moment. Even now, I'm conflicted on what purpose some of these Spielberg references serve in the game, emphasizing characterizations of Indiana instead of prioritizing framing devices. I can't help but think about Raiders here again, where we're introduced to Marion with an 80-second oneer of her taking on a Russian in a drinking game. And winning. Without any dialogue, we get such a strong character introduction and understanding of who she is as a person before any specifics of how she factors into the larger plot. Contrast that with meeting Gina in The Great Circle, another strong female character, mind you. And the emphasis is instead on how she relates to the events of the game and less on who she is. Again, it's the lack of understanding of these types of introductions and what purpose they serve that takes away from the experience of playing Indiana Jones. And it's the opening section that stands in direct contrast to other action-adventure games, and even the Indiana Jones movies themselves, that simply know how to do it better. Because really, all the Great Circle is doing is referencing its own source material when it should be focused on framing a globe-trotting Indiana Jones adventure in the medium of a video game. And because it forgets to do so, it makes for an unremarkable first impression. But look, if you're gonna take anything away from the end of this video, then let it be this. There are no movies called Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's just called Raiders of the Lost Ark. That's it. No Indiana Jones prefix, okay? Spread the word. Let me know what you think of Indiana Jones and the Great Circle. Do you think the opening of the game works? And is the game actually fun? Because I really can't decide if it is or not. I'll be waiting for you down in the comments. Until next time, my name is Christian. This is Save Room. We'll see you in the next one.